My son's wife and her brother, a divorce attorney, drained every account I had. The house I built with my own hands, my retirement fund, my late wife's jewelry, even the truck I drove for 30 years. All of it gone. And when I stood outside the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon with nothing but the clothes on my back and a cardboard box of papers nobody wanted, my son looked through me like I was a stranger, like I was nothing. That's where this story begins. Not with the winning, with the losing. But before I get to how I got it all back, and I mean every single thing, you need to understand who I was, what I built, and exactly what they took from me. Because what happened next wasn't luck. It wasn't an accident. And it sure wasn't mercy from the universe. It was something my father set in motion 43 years before I ever needed it. Something he never told a soul. My name is Harold. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer in Ohio, mostly bridges and overpasses. The kind of work where if you make a mistake, people die. You learn to be precise. You learn to be patient. You learn that everything hidden eventually bears weight. My wife, Eleanor, she was a kindergarten teacher. Soft-spoken, stubborn in the quiet way that good women are stubborn. We married young. I was 24, she was 22, and we built our life the slow, boring, honest way. Saved for 7 years before we put a down payment on our house in Fair Lawn. 3 bedrooms, a yard with an oak tree that Eleanor insisted we name. She called it Bernard. I called her ridiculous, but I loved her for it. We had 1 child, our son Garrett. Garrett was smart, the kind of smart that makes a father puff up his chest at Little League, even when the kid strikes out. Because you already know he's going to end up somewhere better than a baseball field. And he did. Computer science at Ohio State. A good job at a software firm in Columbus. We were proud. I am still proud even now, even after everything, and that is maybe the most painful part of this whole story. Eleanor died 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand in that hospital room, and I made her a promise I didn't fully understand yet. I told her our boy would be okay. I told her I would make sure of it. After Eleanor died, Garrett and I were close for a while. He called every Sunday. He came home for Thanksgiving, Christmas, the 4th of July. And then, 4 years ago, he met Serena. Serena was attractive and well-dressed and spoke like someone who had rehearsed everything she was about to say before she entered the room. I told myself I was being unfair. Grief does things to a person's judgment. I told myself I was just a lonely old man who didn't want to share his son. I was not being unfair. Within 6 months of dating, Garrett was different. He stopped calling on Sundays. When he did call, Serena was always in the background, and the conversation always found its way to my house. Did I have plans for it? Had I updated my will? What did I think property values were doing in Summit County? I thought it was curiosity. Maybe even care. Then they got married, and Serena's brother, Philip, came into our lives. Philip was a family law attorney based in Akron. Sharp dresser, firm handshake. The kind of man who looks at everything like he's appraising it. He and Serena were close, unnervingly close, and he attended every family dinner with an air of someone who was not there for the pot roast. The shift was gradual. That's how these things work. You don't notice the water rising until you're already swimming. Garrett started suggesting I get my affairs in order, reasonable enough for a man my age. He connected me with Philip just for estate planning, he said. Just to protect me. Philip reviewed my will, my retirement accounts, the deed to the house. He said everything looked fine. He said I was in good hands. I was, just not the hands I thought. 18 months later, I received a certified letter from Philip's office. Not a call from my son. A letter. It informed me that Garrett was initiating a legal proceeding to have me declared financially incompetent. The filing alleged I had shown signs of cognitive decline, that I had made erratic financial decisions, and that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. It requested that Garrett be appointed my legal guardian and conservator, which would give him, and by extension Serena and Philip, complete control of my assets. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter in my hands for a long time. The house was very quiet. Bernard the oak tree moved in the wind outside the window. Eleanor's photograph was on the mantel. I am not embarrassed to tell you that I talked to her. Out loud. I said, "Eleanor, what did I do wrong?" And I did not get an answer because the dead don't answer, and because I already knew. I hadn't done anything wrong. I just trusted the wrong people. The conservatorship hearing was set for 8 weeks out. I hired an attorney, a general practice lawyer named Gill, who had done our closings over the years. A decent man with a small office and no experience in elder law. He tried his best, but Philip had spent 10 years in family court. He knew every procedural trick, every form to file, every way to make an old man look confused. They brought a psychologist to testify, a woman who had met me exactly once, for 45 minutes, in an office that smelled like plug-in air freshener. She testified that I showed signs consistent with early cognitive impairment. She cited things like the fact that I repeated a story during our session. I repeat stories. Eleanor always said so. She cited the fact that I had donated a significant sum to my church the previous year, $7,000, money I had budgeted for and chosen freely. Garrett sat in that courtroom and did not look at me. Serena was beside him in a gray blazer, attentive and composed, the image of a worried daughter-in-law. Philip argued the case like he was performing for an audience only he could see. The judge was a man in his late 50s who spent most of the hearing looking at his paperwork. When he spoke, it was briefly. He said the evidence suggested a need for protective measures. He granted a temporary conservatorship pending a full review. My accounts were frozen. I could not sell the house. I could not access my own retirement savings. I was given a monthly allowance, a word that made me feel sick to my stomach, of $800 to cover my expenses. $800. I had worked for 31 years. I had a pension. I had a 401k worth $412,000. I had a house that was paid off, valued at just under $300,000. And I was handed $800 a month and told to be grateful. I moved into my sister-in-law's spare room. Eleanor's younger sister, Bet, who lived 40 minutes away in Medina. She took me in without a single question. She put a quilt on the bed that had been Eleanor's, and she made me coffee every morning, and she did not push me to talk. Bet was 71 years old, and she was stronger than any man I knew. Those first weeks were the worst of my life, and I say that having buried a wife. I had no access to money beyond that allowance. My former colleagues stopped reaching out, not out of cruelty, I think, but out of discomfort. People don't know what to say when a man loses his footing, so they say nothing. The silence is enormous. Garrett called once. Just once. He said, "Dad, this is for your own good." I think some part of him believed it, or wanted to. I said nothing back. I just listened to his voice, the voice I'd heard say, "Daddy," for the first time when he was 2 years old. And then I said, "Okay, son," and I hung up. I did not call again. Some nights I sat in that small room with the quilt pulled up and thought about Eleanor. I thought about what she would say. She was not a woman who tolerated self-pity for long. She'd have let me grieve for a reasonable amount of time, maybe 3 days. And then she'd have handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Harold, what are you going to do about it?" So I started doing something about it. The first thing I did was write everything down. Every conversation I could remember with Philip. Every time I had been alone with him when he asked about finances. Every comment Serena had made about the house. I wrote it all out, longhand in a composition notebook from the dollar store. I had no computer access. Garrett had suggested during the process that I take a break from technology, and like a fool, I had complied. So I wrote by hand, and Bet mailed things for me when I needed. The second thing I did was go through an old metal filing cabinet I had brought from the house before the freeze. I had cleaned out my important papers quickly: tax returns, insurance documents, Eleanor's death certificate. And in the bottom drawer, between a folder of appliance warranties and the original deed to Bernard the oak tree's yard, I found a folded envelope I didn't recognize. My father's handwriting was on the front. He had been gone for 22 years. I had not seen this envelope in any of the boxes I packed when we cleared his house. It must have traveled somehow into my own files, unexamined for 2 decades. I opened it the way you open something you're not sure you should open, slowly and with both hands. Inside was a single page, and a small card with a bank name, an account number, and 4 digits that I recognized immediately as my father's birthday. Backward. The letter was short. My father was not a man of many words. He wrote, "Harold, I am leaving this for you the way my own father left something for me when he was gone. You don't know this, but when I sold the machine shop in 1981, I put some money somewhere safe. Not much, but somewhere no one could find it and no one could take it. I learned that lesson the hard way. Some things need to stay invisible. This account is yours. The interest has been doing its job. Use it when you need it, not before. You'll know when. I love you, son. Dad." The bank on the card was a regional institution, Midwest Cornerstone Savings. I had driven past branches of it my entire life and never thought twice. I borrowed Bit's car the next morning. The branch was in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and an insurance office. The woman at the front desk looked at my ID, looked at the card, and said she'd need to get the manager. I sat in a chair near the window. A ficus plant was dropping leaves in the corner. A child was running in circles near the rope barriers. I watched the child and thought, at least somebody in this room is having a good morning. The manager was a man about Garrett's age. He introduced himself and asked me to follow him to his office. He closed the door. He sat down across from me and looked at his screen, and then at me, and then at his screen again. He said, "Mr. Whitmore, I want to make sure I have this right." He typed something. He said, "This account was opened in 1981. It has been active and compounding since then. It was never closed or transferred." I said, "That sounds right." He said, "I want to show you the balance," and he turned his monitor toward me. I had expected maybe 20,000, maybe 30. My father was a machinist who ran a small shop. He was not a wealthy man. The number on the screen was $488,000, 43 years of compound interest on an initial deposit of, I would later learn, $11,000. Midwest Cornerstone had been acquired 3 times over the decades, each time with the accounts preserved per federal continuity requirements. Nobody had ever closed it. Nobody had ever noticed it. My father had opened it under a slight variation of his name, Albert G. Whitmore instead of Albert George Whitmore, which was why nothing had ever linked it to his estate when he died. I did not cry. I sat very still. The manager offered me water and I took it. What happened next I will try to explain without sounding like I had this all figured out, because I didn't. I was an old man in a flannel shirt, sitting in a strip mall bank, with my dead father's handwriting in my pocket. But something clarified in that moment. The panic that had been living in my chest since the day that certified letter arrived went very quiet. And in the quiet, I could think. I did not tell a soul about that money. Not Bet, not Gil, my attorney, not anyone. Instead, I asked the manager a simple question. Could this account remain exactly as it was while I arranged to have my name officially documented as the account holder? He said that was a standard process and entirely possible. I said, good, and I would like no correspondence sent to any address other than this branch's P.O. box until further notice, with me to retrieve in person. He said he could arrange that. I drove back to Bet's house. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with my composition notebook and I made a list. Everything Philip had done, I had watched him do. I had seen how he operated. And I knew, the same way I knew when a stress calculation was wrong, not from the number but from the feel of the structure, that I was not his first. A man doesn't walk into a courtroom the way Philip walked in without practice. He had done this before. I contacted the Ohio State Bar Association's grievance division, not as a complaint, not yet. I called their public information line and asked a researcher's question. Were there public disciplinary records for attorneys practicing elder law in Summit County? There were. They were online. That evening, Bet let me use her laptop. I searched Philip's full name. His bar number was listed on his firm's website. I found 2 prior grievance filings. Both had been dismissed, one for insufficient evidence, one after the complainant withdrew. But the complaints themselves were public record. Both involved elderly clients. Both involved conservatorship proceedings. Both involved the complainant's children. He had a pattern. He just hadn't had anyone patient enough to document it. I called the woman whose name appeared in one of the old grievance files. I tracked down her number through a public obituary. Her husband had died, and the obituary listed her as a survivor, with a town. Directory assistance, old school. Her name was Miriam. She was 74, living in Canton. When I explained who I was and what had happened to me, there was a silence on the line, and then she said, "I have been waiting for someone to call me about that man for 6 years. Over the next 3 months, I worked carefully and quietly. I found a new attorney, not Gil. I needed someone who specialized specifically in elder financial abuse and professional malpractice. The kind of attorney who had seen what I had seen and knew exactly what to do with it." Her name was Janet Cross. She practiced out of Cleveland. Her office wall was dense with diplomas and state bar commendations and, notably, a framed letter from the Ohio Attorney General thanking her for her contribution to elder protection legislation. I used a small amount from Midwest Cornerstone to retain her. She looked at everything I had, my notes, the disciplinary filings, Miriam's account, a third former client we found through the same method, and she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is actionable. Conservatorship fraud, professional misconduct, potentially conspiracy, if we can show Serena's prior knowledge." She said, "I want you to understand this will take time." I said, "I have time. I'm not going anywhere." I also did something else, something I am more careful about admitting, because it might make me sound calculating. But I am going to tell you anyway, because it is the truth. I had not spoken to Garrett in over 4 months. I knew from Bet, who still occasionally crossed paths with people who knew people, that Serena had begun making inquiries about the sale timeline for my house. The conservatorship review was coming up in 2 months. If it converted to a permanent order, the path to liquidating my assets would accelerate. So I hired someone to look into Garrett, not to harm him, not to catch him at anything. I hired a licensed private investigator to understand what my son's life actually looked like from the outside. What she found was not what I expected. Garrett's company had done a round of layoffs 8 months earlier. He had been spared, but his salary had been reduced. Serena's spending habits, visible on social media, which my investigator reviewed, had not changed. There was a credit card balance in the public filings from a small claims dispute with a contractor. My son was not wealthy. My son was pressured. This changed how I thought about him, not what he had done. But why? A man who does something terrible because he is selfish is one kind of problem. A man who does something terrible because someone he loves has convinced him it's necessary, that's a more complicated grief. I did not reach out to Garrett, not yet. But I stopped thinking of him only as an enemy. The conservatorship review arrived. Janet appeared with me in court. The judge, a different judge, whom Janet had specifically requested through a procedural motion citing the appearance of local familiarity between the original judge and Philip's firm, looked younger and considerably more awake than the first one. Janet presented everything. Miriam and the third former client, a man named Douglas, testified by video deposition. Janet's team had subpoenaed Philip's billing records, which showed a pattern of billing his clients' estates for services that had not been rendered, and which showed a notable uptick in estate-related income in the 3 years since he began attending family dinners with my son. She presented evidence that the psychologist who testified against me had been referred to Philip's cases on 4 prior occasions, a relationship that had not been disclosed to the court. Philip's attorney objected to nearly everything. The judge overruled nearly everything. When the hearing was over, the judge did not deliberate long. She vacated the conservatorship. She ordered the freeze on my accounts lifted immediately. She referred Philip's conduct to the Ohio State Bar for investigation and referred the matter to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges. I walked out of that courthouse in November. The air was cold and thin and tasted like winter coming. Janet shook my hand. She said, "That is how it's supposed to work." I said, "It took long enough." She smiled. She said, "It always does." 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Garrett. He didn't say anything at first. I could hear him breathing. I waited. I have learned in 67 years that waiting is usually better than speaking. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry." His voice sounded like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had just been told he was allowed to set it down. He said, "I didn't understand what was happening. Serena said you were struggling. Philip said it was just paperwork, just protection." I believed them. And then the court filing started and I told myself it was still just paperwork. He stopped. He said, "I knew. I think I knew, and I didn't want to know." I said, "I know you did, son." He started crying. A grown man, my son, crying on the phone like he was 10 years old and had broken something valuable. I did not enjoy it. I want to be clear about that. There is no satisfaction in hearing your child break, even when they broke first. I said, "Garrett, listen to me." I said, "I forgive you. I am saying that now on the phone so you don't have to wonder. But I also need you to hear this. Forgiving you is not the same as going back to the way things were. What happened happened. You made choices. So did I. We are going to have to build something different now. Something new, and it is going to take time, and it is going to be uncomfortable, and there will be days when we don't know what to say to each other. Are you willing to do that?" He said yes. He said it the way people say things when they mean them. Serena and Garrett separated 4 months later. I do not know the full details, and I did not ask. What I know is that Garrett called me one Sunday and said he had moved into a smaller apartment and that he had started seeing a therapist, and that his therapist had helped him understand some things about the dynamic he'd been living in. I told him I was glad. I meant it. Philip's law license was suspended pending the bar investigation. The county prosecutor filed charges. The case is ongoing as I tell this story, and I will not pretend I know how it will end. What I know is that it began, that it is being heard, and that Miriam, who spent 6 years waiting for someone to call, now has an attorney working her case pro bono out of Janet's office. What I did with the money from my father's account, once my own accounts were restored, was not what I would have predicted for myself. My retirement accounts came back. The house came back. Everything they had frozen came unfrozen. I had more than I needed. And the inheritance from my father's shop, that $488,000, was sitting there quiet and patient, the way my father had left it. I thought about what my father had written. Some things need to stay invisible. He wasn't just talking about money. I understand that now. I donated a significant portion to an elder law legal aid organization in Akron that provides free representation to seniors facing conservatorship abuse. The director cried when I called with the amount. I told him my father would have liked the use. She asked if she could name something after him. I said he would have hated that, and she laughed, and we agreed to leave it anonymous. I kept the rest, not as a monument, not as a display, as what it was, A gift from a man who understood that the hardest storms are the ones that come from inside your own family, and that the only way through them is to have something steady waiting on the other side. Garrett and I have dinner now. The first few were awkward in the particular way that dinners are awkward when two people are trying to be honest without knowing how yet. He asked me once, toward the end of a meal, if I had been angry at him. Really angry, he said, not just disappointed. I told him the truth. I said yes. I said there were nights in that spare room at Bet's when I was so angry I couldn't sleep. I said anger isn't the thing I wanted to hold on to. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't there. He nodded. He said, "You have every right to it." I said, "I know. I just chose not to let it be the whole story." Eleanor's picture is back on the mantel where it belongs. Bernard the oak tree made it through another winter. I still talk to her sometimes, not as often. Not out of desperation, more out of habit and love, which are maybe not so different in the end. I am 67 years old. I have a restored house, a rebuilding relationship with my son, and a legal case that has already helped 3 other people and counting. I have my pension, my coffee, my sister-in-law Bet, who still refuses to let me pay for groceries when I stay over, and a composition notebook full of careful handwriting from the worst year of my life. I also have a letter from my father in the breast pocket of my winter coat. I move it to whatever coat I'm wearing, season to season. It's worn soft at the folds now. Bad men or bad situations or bad choices, they can take what they can see. They can freeze what they can find. But they cannot take what was already planted in you. The steadiness, the patience, the willingness to wait out a storm without becoming one. My father knew that. He left me the proof. I am just glad I found the envelope before the winter got too cold. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone going through something like what I went through, send this to them. Sometimes the most useful thing one person can do for another is say, "You are not the only one. There is a way through." I found mine in a strip mall bank on a Tuesday morning, in a letter written by a man who loved me before he knew how badly I would need it, and that was enough. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a mystical way, not in the way people sometimes mean when they say what goes around comes around, as if the universe is keeping score in some back office somewhere. I mean it in the plainest, most mechanical sense. Every choice produces a consequence. Every pattern, eventually, produces a result. Philip had run this same playbook before I came along. The grievance filings were there, sitting in public record, for anyone patient enough to look. He had gotten away with it twice because his victims ran out of resources before they ran out of truth. He counted on that. He counted on exhaustion winning where evidence couldn't. What he didn't count on was a retired structural engineer with a composition notebook, a borrowed laptop, and absolutely nowhere else to be. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require an audience. I sat in Bet's spare room for months and wrote down everything I could remember. Not because I was certain it would matter, but because it was the honest thing to do with the time I had. Integrity is mostly just that. Doing the careful thing when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. Garrett chose the easier thing. He chose to believe what was convenient, and I understand why now. I'm not excusing it, but I understand it. Pressure from someone you love, someone who has slowly narrowed your world until her version of reality is the only one that feels stable, that is its own kind of trap. Character isn't about never falling into traps. It's about what you do when you finally see the walls. My father understood something I am still learning. He understood that the most durable things are invisible, not hidden out of shame, but protected out of wisdom. He put $11,000 into an account in 1981, and he never mentioned it to anyone, not even my mother as far as I know. because he had learned firsthand that visible assets invite visible threats. He didn't leave me money. He left me a demonstration of what quiet steadiness looks like across 40 years. The account was just the proof. The real inheritance was the lesson underneath it, that patience is not passivity, that waiting is not weakness, and that some of the most powerful things you can do happen in complete silence. I think about Miriam, the woman in Canton who waited 6 years for someone to call. 6 years of knowing she had been wronged and having no way to move it forward. When Janet's office took her case, Miriam cried on the phone. She said she had started to believe she had imagined it, that the gaslighting had done that to her over time. That's what these situations do when they go unanswered. They don't just take your money. They take your confidence in your own memory, your own perception. Fighting back isn't just about recovering what was lost. It's about refusing to let someone else rewrite what you know to be true. And Garrett, my son, we are not where we were. We will probably never be exactly where we were. But we are somewhere, and somewhere is not nothing. He made a choice that hurt me in ways I don't have complete words for yet. And then he made another choice, to pick up the phone, to say the words, to stay in the discomfort of being accountable instead of disappearing from it. That second choice matters. It doesn't erase the first, but it matters. If I could say one thing to anyone listening who was in the middle of what I went through, not at the end of it, not looking back, but right in it, sitting in a spare room with $800 in a frozen account and a son who won't return your calls, it would be this. Write it down, all of it. Get the details on paper before memory softens them. Find one person you trust completely and stay close to that person. And do not mistake quietness for surrender. The steadiest structures I ever built were the ones that looked, from the outside, like they weren't doing much of anything. They were just holding. Holding is sometimes the entire job. My father knew that. I know it now. And that, more than the $488,000, is what I intend to keep.